Why do the heathen nations rage, and the peoples plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. Now, as we've seen the recent events in the life of our country and the murder of Charlie Kirk, we decided it was time to come back to YouTube and to record this to give some biblical understanding of the way that we ought to live in light of this, the great responsibility we have as individuals. And I'm here today with John. We're going to introduce ourselves a little bit, as we haven't actually ever introduced ourselves. We're just a couple of guys, basically, to your understanding. And John, why don't you talk about yourself a little bit and introduce yourself to the audience?
So, hey everyone, my name is John Cabbage, and I'm a college student. For a while, I was helping out Pastor Ben with this online ministry, and really, it's been a blessing to me to see how this has grown, how this has touched people, um, and as of right now, I'm a college student, just going back to school, trying to get my degree, and um, you know, eventually go out to serve the Lord in a vocation out in the world. But as of right now, fulfilling my vocation as a student, that's taking up much of my time. It's drawing me away from this platform, but it's my vocation, and trying to do it faithfully where the Lord has placed me in this new season. And another vocation that has landed upon my shoulders in this semester of college is that I am on my campus, the president of the College Republicans, and as of last Tuesday, fortuitous timing, um, auspicious timing, I was contacted by Turning Point, and they wanted me to lead a Turning Point chapter that they were looking to establish on my campus.
And so on Wednesday, we have a prayer vigil that's going to be taking place. And John's going to be putting the whole thing together as now the president of the Young Republicans on the campus, as well as now the representative of Turning Point on the campus there. And with these events, it feels like we're kind of being dragged along. And as a church, we're going to be supporting that. And me, myself, as a minister, as much as I possibly can. My name is Ben Rochester. I'm the pastor of Pilgrim Presbyterian Church in Alpine, California. And we haven't really talked about our names or anything like that because, frankly, it's mostly because I've been kicked off YouTube so many times that I stopped using my name. We've done some things that the powers that be don't like, and they're pretty mundane and actually kind of surprising that we got so much vitriol and things like that in the past for how little it really was. I mean, it was like having a wedding that was, in public during COVID and things like that.
Right.
We put that on the live stream. So we got kicked off for quite a while for that. We got in trouble for silly things, really. But now I think it's right to put our names out there and to put ourselves out there for such a time as this, because we really want to get the word out and to take responsibility for the aftermath of a martyr being raised to glory with Christ in heaven. I think that Charlie Kirk was a martyr. What do you think? I mean, there's a lot of debate about this right now.
Well, I mean, he absolutely was, and it's kind of disgusting to see, what's going on, especially within the walls of the church. Obviously, there's going to be, people who are spiritually sick, mentally sick, evil in our society that we have to contend with, that are going to celebrate this and undermine the, as is a common leftist tactic. I mean, like the KGB and Pravda invented, steal the martyrdom. Mm-hmm. But what's even, I think, like more significant in this case is what Christian figures and people within the church have done, basically saying this has nothing to do with Christ. This has nothing to do with Christianity. Charlie Kirk was a political figure and he died for political reasons. And, you can't make that an analogy to martyrdom. Well, I think that's absurd, because Charlie Kirk didn't die. He wasn't killed. He wasn't assassinated in cold blood because of his takes on fiscal policy or of his takes on foreign policy. Or just in, in this, his specific interpretation of, constitutional case law. No, he was murdered because he took stands for the gospel in the public square because he was willing to say what these people are saying the exact opposite of it, which is that yes, like there is a moral, spiritual component to politics, that there is a charge upon the civil magistrate to do justly under God, and that is what Charlie did through Turning Point. He was gospel first, and of course with disagreements and discrepancies with our reformed postmillennial worldview,
Right.
but that doesn't really matter right now.
Yeah. Yeah. The fundamentals of the faith, which are to the world instantly political. They get it. And we've been pussyfooting around with all of these different, ideologies in Christianity of basically isolating ourselves away from the implications of what we say. The unbeliever hears it clearly. They understand they can't do the things that they want to do. They can't call evil good and good evil. Magistrates cannot, and the fantasy world that they live in cannot. And the thing that I think by far more than anything else terrifies leftists and leftist ideology that lives in that sinful fantasy world is what the scripture says in Ephesians 1:22. And he put all things under his feet and gave him to be head over all things to the church. So the first clause says he put all things under his feet. All things means all things, it's universal. So there's a universality of all things in heaven and on earth, angels, the cosmos, everything under his feet, and gave him to be head over all things refers to his mediation. It's according to him as mediator that he is given this station as head of all things, because as son of God, he's already God. He's already head of all things, the ruler of all things.
Right.
But the word head is referring to mediation, the head of the body. And then it says to the church, which means that all things exist and history continues for the sake of the glorification of Christ and his church to bring his spotless bride before his Father and offer the kingdom to his Father at the end of the age, that God would be all in all. So this means that all of life is theological, including politics. And it's a silly thing that has been said because of the fear of man and the desire to keep religion privatized in obedience to the word of man instead of listening to God's binding word, that has led to this sort of fever pitch that we now have, now sitting on the razor's edge.
Right. And I think that's a good kind of segue into another point we wanted to cover, which is I'm personally, and I think this reflects the sentiment of a lot of people. I'm personally relieved that at this current moment things aren't much worse than they already are. Um, you know, this really is a and I pardon the wordplay here, but it really is a turning point.
Yeah.
It is basically and obviously not the most wholesome figure that we could point out here, but you know, it's as Sam Hyde said in the cold open of his show, which Charlie Kirk is you, Christian, you know, white man in America, conservative, left of whatever fancy. I mean, right of whatever like leftist fancy is currently on the rise in the DNC.
Right. The moving goalpost
Yeah,
of truth in flux.
yeah. But like Charlie Kirk is you, and I think that is ultimately what's touched people about this the most, is that they look at Charlie Kirk, and I'm gonna be honest, and this is not gonna be a nice thing to say, and I repent of it. But I mean, I used to make fun of Charlie Kirk a lot when he was alive, because I'm like, oh well, he's just too nice. He doesn't have the killer instinct. He's not playing to win.
Yeah, he's just having a conversation
Yeah,
with people. And that's it.
but you know, the reason that's part of the reason why this has hit people so hard is because they're like, there are some people across the country where it's like, in my age range, and also just across like, race and age and gender, and basically pretty much any category you can think of. Everyone knows someone who has Charlie Kirk's politics.
Right.
Everybody knows someone who, is probably to the right of Charlie Kirk.
Right.
And they look at that and go, well, if they're willing to kill him in front of his wife and children, um, when he's simply just having a conversation on a college campus, what
Yeah,
would they do to me? What would they do to my loved ones?
right. And then we bring up a bunch of other questions of like, what should we be doing with this? Because what instantly comes to mind is the wise counsel of people like Doug Wilson, who've said, "Don't take the bait."
Right.
And he realizes that there is a desire for bloodshed. There's a desire for revenge, and that needs to be done in a way that is legitimate through the courts. And that we're going to talk about a lot of these things, as well as other good things that we have seen, which is that there has not been retaliation, there's not been vigilante
Right.
justice. Those are biblical things, and I thank the Lord for it,
Yeah.
as well as for the commentators having taken the track of having good tact, at least on the right, obviously.
Well,
On
yeah.
the
I
left,
mean,
it's a show. We'll just call it a show.
yeah.
But they haven't been opportunistic. They haven't been clout seeking. They haven't been capitalizing on this as a means to further some sort of agenda, but rather just honoring the memory. And I think that's the thing that we should remember here. And the reason why we're recording this is not opportunistically to clout seek. I mean, we're doing this basically because of responsibility.
Right.
We are responsible for the aftermath of the voice of a martyr who's gone out. And specifically, even though he was talking about the law at the time, and many people have uh, complained that, well, he's not a martyr because he was talking about the law at that moment and not the gospel. The fact is that he constantly spoke the gospel and did not back down from it. And that's all you're hearing as the aftermath from every Christian who's out there, and even non Christians who are saying, respectively, this man died for his faith.
Yeah.
And just because it's law and not gospel he was talking about at that moment doesn't discount the entire kind of avatar of what he is. Like you're saying, he represents you as an individual, a Christian individual. And we have to realize that the thing that frightens the fantasy world of the left more than anything else is the lordship of Christ over the souls of men and those who are willing to obey him, because we are not our own. We're owned by Christ. He has died for us. We are bought with his blood, and we follow him in covenant.
Right.
So it's a different thing than the worldlings think. And I understand that that's probably actually more frightening to them, because they've been taught to think that way as pawns in a leftist game.
Yeah.
They're just pawns made to be frightened so that they would want to remove people from the face of the earth who disagree with them. So that's a classic Marxist tactic, right?
Right.
Is you divide and conquer that way. People are basically pawns in the game. James Davison Hunter points this out in his book To Change the World, where he says that basically they're igniting that Nietzschean will to power to overthrow other people, because you have group A over here said about group B over here that group B is trying to take your stuff or cause you harm. So you vote for me and I'll remove group B from all
Right.
of their power. That's classic tactic, and divide and conquer. And then there's no conversation, which is ironically, you can see the glory of the work that Charlie Kirk was doing. Having the conversation really humanized him, but
Right.
then there were those who didn't see that eye to eye.
Yeah. And that's part of really also why this hits hard in a very large, you know, way, is because we saw in that attack basically almost, like it couldn't be any more clear in like the symbolism of it. Now, yes, real tragic event, but if I was, looking back at this 200 years ago, I mean 200 years from now, and I look back 200 years ago to September 10th, 2025, I basically like would like the symbolism would hit me over the head of basically you have Charlie Kirk, whose entire career, entire brand was, okay, this is Western civilization. We are going to reason. We are going to talk about this. We're going to debate. And the best idea is going to win because I'm going to convince people and they're going to go vote.
Right.
And they are going to elect a leader based upon the argument, the strength of the argument. Because that's what separates us from the third world. That's what separates us and separated us during the Cold War from the commissars and the KGB and the Pravda and the Iron Curtain, is because we had the debate. We had the freedom of speech. We believed you know, that, okay, it's actually worth it to go out and defend the ability of people to express themselves, to be able to, practice what they, believe out in public, in the public square. You know, that's what, I feel like in large part, it comes from Christianity.
Oh, 100%.
It comes from our
Nobody's ever
biblical.
lifted a finger for those things besides Christians.
Yeah, no, and that's part of what has, in terms of our civilization, made us great as an outflowing of our Christian roots, because nobody wants to live in the Iron Curtain third world banana republic. Nobody wants to live in the system where the person who rules your life is the one who was the one who's most cruel, the one who's most brutal, the one who sits on the throne of bayonets, the one who was sitting on the pile of corpses at the end of the day. Nobody wants to live under that person. Nobody wants to live in that society. And that is ultimately, you know, the force which tried to end, you know, this, you know, value of free speech that we have in our society. And the way that they wanted to do that was by ending Charlie Kirk's life.
So this brings up other questions about, like, I mean, the emotions everybody's feeling. This is an emotional time, but it's emotional for multiple reasons. I think
Right.
one is the things like the visceral reaction you have to a man being shot and then his daughter, his little child, running to him and embracing his dying body because she's afraid of the sound of gunshots. They were there with him, and that's disturbing. That's on the face of it. And then the man who's the nice guy being killed for his views and for what he represented. Those bring rage and sadness and sympathy with his wife and children. But then there's also the question of the larger world. What does this mean? How has the world changed? Because we've crossed the river now. We've crossed the Rubicon with this in some ways.
Yeah.
Um, Law and order still exists, and
Right.
the powers that be, thank the Lord, are actually doing something about it. Maybe not as effectively as they could, um, but all these things are in God's hand, and in some ways, it feels like we're being dragged along. I felt this in the ministry many times where things are afoot that obviously are of divine providence for some purpose that I can't discern yet, and we're just being dragged along. So at
Yeah.
church, I've been preparing for months on teaching a Sunday school series on the church and society. So it includes church and state, but it's much larger than that. And it's one of these things where I thought, I'm going to do this, and we'll have it in the back pocket for if we ever need it in the future. And then this happens the week before the Sunday when I begin the Sunday school class. I'm preaching on Acts chapter 26, Paul on trial for the faith before a king. And now Paul just charms the pants off of everybody, basically, in that passage. He's so good at explaining himself and debating and everything because the Lord was with him, the Spirit was speaking through him. And it shows us the glory of that pulpit of the ascended Lord who's speaking through his church. And these things are for such a time as this. And when you think about those passages in the scripture where they're particularly political, Esther and Mordecai, Daniel in the Medo-Persian Empire, and other places where they have to disobey tyrannical rulers, you understand that they see God's word as the path forward and the way of action. But there's an aftermath and responsibility because now something has changed with this. And the result is actually not that it silences the word, but it opens it up and it gives it its pulpit. So there's a pulpit of the ascended Christ that is gained by those who are given the martyr's crown. And there's a responsibility for us who are left behind not to capitalize on it, not to be opportunistic with it, and not to be prideful about it, and not to look at ourselves as greater than those who are in sin still, because the only thing we brought to our salvation is our sin, and it's all of the grace of God. And but for the grace of God, there go we. But rather, we ought to have the sense of responsibility now to proclaim the gospel and the peace of the Prince of Peace. Jesus proclaims peace to the nations, terms of peace from the King of Kings to all who will come into his kingdom, that you ought to enter into his covenant by way of faith, repentance, and baptism. and then walk faithfully with the Lord as one of his subjects, redeemed by his blood to receive a kingdom that will have no end. Now, that's an offer to the kings of the earth. So if you are in the politics and you are somewhere within the bureaucracy or you are somewhere within the civil magistrate, Christ invites you into his kingdom, not just your soul, but your life and your body and everything that you have responsibility over, to be your ruler and to offer you a kingdom that will have no end. Because when you think about it, you will live and you will die, and that your inheritance will be left to who knows? Your family? Will he be a fool? Will he be wise? Who knows? And what you find out is that you can't take things with you, but Christ offers you a kingdom that will have no end.
Yeah. And I think another thing to point out there is in terms of responsibility, um, and how to like look at this. And yeah, there's still a lot of anger. I feel it in a large part. Um, but that is very important to basically to realize, okay, we need peace. That is what Christ calls us. He calls us to peace. He brings peace. He is the Prince of Peace. You know, when we commune with Him, we are at peace. We that is why He died, so that we may have peace with God. And
Turn our
that's
plowshares or our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks.
yeah. But there is one thing to mention about peace, and I believe we mentioned this before on this on this channel, that it was a quote from the admiral of the Royal Navy who modernized the Navy before World War One, and was just like a kind of great, just kind of like political and like geostrategic thinker, Jackie Fisher. Um, he had a very prescient quote, which I believe is relevant at the moment, which is that everyone wants peace, just a peace that suits them. So yeah, I mean, we want peace, but we want the peace of Christ's justice ruling and reigning. That's the peace that we want. And that peace and that justice requires that we do punish the evildoers. We have but it has to be done through the law, the rule of law. If you're thinking of picking up a gun, if you're thinking of doing harm, put that down. Don't do that, because then that's blood that cries out against you on your account.
It's super important to address this, which I mean, frankly, is addressed in the Reformation era, by the magisterial reformers. And throughout our history as Reformed people, we've been decidedly anti-revolutionary. Now,
Yeah.
that's there's a misnomer with the American Revolution. I was pointing this out in conversation this morning, that the American War for Independence was not like the French Revolution. The term American Revolution is actually propaganda from post War for Independence French Revolutionary Enlightenment thinking that has been foisted upon the academic circles. And just a change of terminology makes you think, oh, there's French Revolution, there's American Revolution, there's a revolution over here, revolution over there. But anti revolutionary refers to rejecting the humanism of the French Revolution, but also rejecting the methodology of pure democracy that seeks to establish the rule of majority of people, because humanism says that people are the standard of truth. It comes down to God's law and the truth that is above all, or the human mind that's making up truth as we go along. And if you have that kind of system, what ends up happening inevitably and mathematically, according to Francis Schaeffer, is empire. You end up with Napoleon, an emperor,
Yeah.
not a kind of bohemian, cool, a bunch of hippies hanging around, each according to his ability, each
Right.
according to his need. No, you end up with empire every single time.
Yeah, you end up with like the most brutal, politically cunning, and like killer instinct guy at the top of the pile at
Right.
the end of the day. Like once you debase truth, once you debase, you know, any kind of you know standard above your own, um, that's when you get the monsters.
Mm-hmm.
That's and I would say the French got off easy when it came with Napoleon.
Right. At least I mean, well, yeah. And I think we have to define too, like what tyranny is. We have to think about what our responsibility is, and actually, you have to go back in history. A lot of these things are learned from history, and the path has already been forged, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So, in the city of Magdeburg, in the era of city states, in Magdeburg in Germany, they were sieged by the Roman Catholics. And so the Lutherans that were there, the pastors got together and poured over the scriptures to define and write down what they already believed and would have been worked out in the Middle Ages. But now they had to put it in paper in a short form in what was called the Magdeburg Confession
Right.
to argue with their magistrates to fight for them and the legitimate way by which that would be done according to the scriptures. And what they did was they looked at the responsibility of lesser magistrates to bring about the change of tyrannical magistrates that were over them, basically, that the lesser magistrates were petitioned by the people and by the church in order to protect the lives of citizens.
Right.
And so that principle of the lesser magistrate, you can find a ton of stuff about it. You can read the Magdeburg Confession, it's fairly short. But what that does is it allows the rule of law and uses the legitimate power that God has ordained in the civil magistrate to check itself. So there's a self checking mechanism of the lesser magistrate who can remove the over magistrates. But also, we have to think about with these revolutionaries that
Right.
are, running around and they're on the internet and all these things. What do we do with that? We ought to be petitioning the magistrate, the actual legitimate powers,
Right.
and we ought to be seeking to have justice and the rule of law be brought about. If you have terror cells and all these different groups that are out there, they need to be brought to justice. They need to be declared as so, and they need to be treated as such.
Right.
And it looks like that might actually happen.
Yeah. And again, I just want to reiterate, vengeance is the Lord's, and his only subcontractor is the civil magistrate. So again, if you're thinking of picking up a gun, if you're thinking of committing violence, if you're thinking of spilling blood because you think it might make things better, if you think it might, you know, sate your anger, you think it might, you know, like equal, like like level the playing field, even the score, then we disavow that completely.
Yeah, we
We
reject,
we
we deny.
reject that. God rejects it.
Yep. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord.
And
And
if you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. That that is like the point here is that
yeah,
like God, vengeance is the Lord, and He always subcontracts Romans 13 to the civil magistrate. That is the only way this gets solved.
right.
Now, defend yourself. Obviously, that is a right that you have. I mean, you should have like, because this shows there are evil people out there in this country, in this world, that will persecute you in this current day and age. That will persecute you for Christ's sake. So defend yourself. That is perfectly allowed. In fact, it's a positive good that you defend yourself, your wife, your children, your home, your property. That is absolutely like a good thing to do in this moment. But once you take that and go towards vengeance, that is, that's where you step out of bounds. That is what we have to reject, and that is ultimately what we have to, just pray doesn't happen, because that is the last thing that the church needs right now. It's the last thing that the country needs.
Yeah, and these things are defined by Magdeburg, and what we are supposed to do in different situations are spelled out. So they give four different kinds of persecution, four different kinds of tyranny that can take place, and there are different ways that we ought to react positively in each of them. So the first level, I guess you could call it, the first kind of tyranny would be a ruler who has personal corruption. Now, that's like ubiquitous in our civil government, right? Corruption all over the place.
Right.
And what you're supposed to do is pray, vote, use whatever legitimate rights you have as a citizen to remove them from office. Pray that the Lord would convert them, or pray that the Lord would remove them. And or Luther had some more spicy words to say. He said, "Lord, would you convert or kill him?" Basically. So that's step one: prayer, imprecatory psalms, that sort of thing. Second step, second kind or level of tyranny would be a support of lawlessness. And now this is a strategic support of lawlessness by the magistrate
Right.
to call evil good and to call good evil, which has been happening here for many years, especially since the 1960s and the sexual revolution and everything like that. and now protecting evil and allowing lawlessness. And so the allowance of lawlessness has now come to the point where you have rioters who are really terror cells. They are not at all in any way protesters. It is not mostly peaceful protesting. It is not even protesting. It is rioting and
Yeah.
stochastic terrorism. This form of warfare that is done at just the amount to be able to be spun by our media to be kept around. So they're not prosecuted, and normal people are prosecuted. You know,
Yeah.
parents said,
Well,
and so this is level two. Is basically the
and
answer would be don't obey the evil laws and remove them through the lesser magistrate.
right. But also, there's something else I want to say on the support of lawlessness is
Mm-hmm.
the angle of and this is what we saw. The full details of it happened a while ago, but we saw the full details of it released on Tuesday, um, last week, of the full video of Arena, um, the Ukrainian refugee getting stabbed on that train in Charlotte, North Carolina. Um, that should have never happened because that was the support of lawlessness by the state of North Carolina. You had a career criminal, and this happens all across the country. This is just the first
Yeah.
instance in which we finally have a video, black and white, literally just cold lines of what's happening. Um, in terms of the murder that's happening there. And this guy, he had been in and out of the jail system about 12 or 14 times, and yet he was free. He was freed from a from a psych ward in, I believe, January of this year. Should have never been out on the street, but because our states support lawlessness, they protect the criminals and despise the victims. You know, a young woman lies dead who sought safety from a literal war zone and found that actually she was safer in the war zone than in a train car, a light rail car in Charlotte, North Carolina, which, aside from just the despicable evil that's being brought before the face of all of us, of, the dereliction of duty and the positive of, like evil action of the civil magistrate in that case, it's just embarrassing
Mm-hmm.
for the country.
Right.
What?
And especially because the embarrassment that comes afterward, where people just make it about race rather than realizing, no, it's a matter of law and order.
Right.
That's what's missing. That's the problem. It's a matter of actual effective leadership that is not being done. And this is the sort of situation where you have to remove the factions within the government by the lesser magistrate. They have to be removed
Right.
in constitutional ways, legitimately, and through the law courts because they're derelict in their duties.
Right. But and again, it's like, this simply gained the notoriety it has because we have a video of it, and it's so crystal clear what's happening there. Um, and I mean, there actually like is a little bit of a racial aspect there of, this was a racially motivated crime. He said, I got that white girl
Right.
afterwards. But this has happened so many times, and it's just it's a plague throughout our land of this lawlessness, the support of lawlessness by the state. I mean, it's called anarcho tyranny in some circles
Mm-hmm.
because if you were to defend yourself, then that's when the law shows up. That's when they throw the book at people because they defend themselves from this. But if you're a criminal who is terrorizing the law-abiding citizens of this country, the state supports your lawlessness. You walk free. You're in and out of jail. You're released from psych wards when you absolutely shouldn't be. And that is, you know, yeah, I mean, we're already there in terms of, the
Right.
second form of
We're
tyranny.
definitely at the second form of tyranny. Now, Magdeburg itself, they actually say that much wisdom must be utilized in order to discern whether you have entered into the third form of tyranny or not. And particular situations need to be weighed out. And that's the advice that is given from the wise men who put together the Magdeburg Confession. But level three is basically where physical harm is inflicted on the populace and the lesser magistrates who do not agree with the lawlessness of the ultimate magistrate. So the top magistrate, basically whoever is the ruler, the final ruler, or a final ruling class, if they are, inflicting actual violence and harm upon the property or lives or livelihoods of the populace in order to support unjust laws, then the need is to remove them from their office by either diplomacy, courts, and once that's exhausted, by physically removing them from their office. It doesn't have to be done violently, it can be done by arrest. But if physical harm is inflicted on the populace by the magistrate in order to support unjust laws, that is level 3. And again, now where is the line? Particular situations need to be read.
Yeah.
But again, you see how it's lesser magistrates must take the lead in this. Now you can support the lesser magistrate, and that's what the Minutemen were doing,
Right.
So, but
They
at
were
the same time,
protecting the rights that they already had.
exactly, exactly, and they were deputized to do so really fast, and in 1 minute they're there. That's
Yeah.
the idea.
And I'm actually, this isn't, again, this isn't cloud chasing or, trying to say something inflammatory to get likes and views or whatever.
That we don't have that kind of following. Have to worry
No,
about that probably.
no, yeah, no, but I mean, I just want to make this clear, because I mean, this is something that can, like you said, it requires discernment, and it could be read as this could be read as lacking discernment. But I've thought about this a lot, and I thought we were ramping up to 3
Yeah.
over the last year since what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th. I think on Wednesday we arrived at level 3. Um, because again, it's a top-down thing. You have, you know, the wickedness manifest that in the political power of the media, inciting violence against Christians, conservatives. You have the DNC who gives the media their talking points. You have the NGOs um, that were mentioned by Vice President Vance in his um, address today. Um, that are hand in glove with both the party and the media, and they incited this violence, stochastic terrorism. We have to call it what it is. It's stochastic terrorism.
Well, who came up with the term stochastic terrorism? It's a positive thing to them, and they utilize it well.
Yeah.
Right. It's just using their own terminology to describe what's going on.
Yeah, but I mean, of course, they want to have plausible deniability and put distance between themselves and it.
Right.
Which that is another thing. We're not really super structured with this discussion. It's, but I do believe it's valuable because you have like all these people coming out and quote unquote condemning political violence. Very quote unquote condemning political violence.
Right.
It's
after having promoted it for years.
Yeah. But it's literally just to take heat off of themselves. You wax poetic about how this violence has no place in our country after you incited it, were complicit in it for years. And I'll just ask, what are all these ravings and outpourings about political violence before the silence of Charlie Kirk's grave? I paraphrased Churchill there, because this is like I think we have arrived at level 3 because when you have much as far as I appreciate what the president is doing, and he's made a lot of progress in sort of unraveling this permanent Washington, this like ruling class, this media oligarchy,
deep state or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
bureaucratic state.
Yeah, the administrative state. As much as he's made progress on it, it's not gone, and it still holds a lot of the levers of power. So when they're inciting this and they're getting the result that they want, that is physical violence against the lesser magistrates. I mean, you've seen death threats to Republican politicians all across the board. And then you have the killing of Charlie Kirk that they incited. So yes, I think we're definitely at level 3, and it's something that we have to resolve through the rule of law, because much of what is coming out about the killing of Charlie Kirk is that it was a murder plot, a conspiracy. Well, we have to dismantle that network through bringing that up in the court of conspiracy. Um, you have racketeering because a lot of this is a racket. Um, and networks of these NGOs and media organizations that incite this kind of political violence. That can be resolved through the law as well. This is how it has to happen: is that you're having the rising up of violence against the lawful, you know, like authorities and lawful individuals, um, by these lawless and evil people, and it has to be resolved, you know, by lawful means.
Which is really the key to the whole thing. Is uh, if we believe in God's law, then we must abide by God's law. And part of that law is that He has ordained the civil magistrate with the power of coercion by physical violence, a monopoly on physical violence for that purpose. Now, individuals, and in our Constitution, we're supposed to also protect other people. The Princess Diana law, I think it's called the Good Samaritan law, requires people to step in and help people and things like that. So we do have personal responsibility. You have
Right.
personal responsibility to defend yourself. You should probably learn to squat. We did leg day today.
Yeah.
And so if we sound shaky, it's both emotions and leg day. And you should probably learn how to physically defend yourself without a weapon and with a weapon and things like that. Those are good things to do. Those are your responsibilities. But ultimately, in society, to curb great evil like this, whether it is level 2 or is level 3 tyranny, um, the fact is the responsibility of it remains the same. It's upon the civil magistrate, and we need to petition the civil magistrate to do the work that they ought to do and to remove those factions within NGOs, deep state, and whatever you're going to call it, within the bureaucratic whole world behemoth that's out there, or Leviathan, I guess, that's out there. They must remove it, and we have to pray for them and keep their iron to the fire. The fourth level is, of course, persecution of the Church of Christ, which basically the answer is the same as above, same as before, but that's where the beast from the sea and the harlot who rides on the back of the beast have begun persecuting the true church. And it happens, and perhaps, because of the fact that politics have become theological and theological has become politics.
Mm-hmm.
And we've finally returned to the true equilibrium of everything we do in life is theology. And that is a good thing in the sense of the mind being opened to reason. Because a lot of times people are basically moved by emotion. They're ruled by their emotions and think by how this is going to make me feel. Man, if I talk about being a Christian, or I talk about creationism, or I talk about my views of right and wrong and the lordship of Christ as mediator over all things, what's that going to do to my public image? What's that going to do to me? It's going to cause me harm. So I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to obey the modernists who say I better keep my religion privatized and not speak about it in public. That is a self protection based off of emotion.
Yeah.
Reason would dictate that we ought to have the lordship of Christ over everything, and that whether our opinion counts, hey, I've got my convictions, and those convictions are my opinion that I have spoken to the world, and I'm going to act on them. And that's the real way we ought to live before the face of God, to have a clear conscience. Um,
Yeah.
and
And
go ahead.
yeah, that's, a good thing. And I think it's but obviously there's a shame of, like, it took us to this point to realize that, Christians have skin in the game.
Yeah.
And, I used to really think it was dumb whenever I'd see, like, it was an image. I think it started in about like 2021 or whatever. Um, that I keep seeing posted all over Instagram and Twitter, retweeted, and like the image is like lost like half its pixels, and it's like because it's been reposted so many times. But um, basically, what the image basically says is, like, this is Gen Z's Pascal's wager. You know, I might not believe that God is real, but the enemy seems to be so hell bent on evil and like destroying God's people, that like I might as well believe in God, because that it like that seems to be like the only defense against this. And I used to think that was really dumb, but and like to a certain extent, still kind of is.
It's a childish, naive way of looking at theology,
Yeah,
but it is true.
yeah,
You know,
and if it leads people to Christ, like I've seen anecdotes. I've even had like a couple friends message me and ask me about like Christianity and like say like, hey, I might be like wanting to go to church again. Because like the spiritual warfare aspect of this in our society has become so clear.
right?
Um, and and they're right. You know, um, I could have like mocked it as like like it's kind of like a childish view of things. It's like, okay, well, Pascal's wager, even on like the face of it, is really dumb, but it definitely seems to have weight and carry with people when they see acts like this, when they see displays like in years past of gross iniquity um, from forces in our society. you know for them to wake up and realize that there is a spiritual dimension, that it's not all just matter and emotion, that it's not just let people be free and do whatever they want, um, that there actually is good and evil, that there are spiritual malevolent forces that hate them and want to drag them to hell, and that Christ is the only defense against it. The fact that the people are like realizing that through this, I think, is a huge blessing.
So that returns to responsibility.
Yeah,
We have responsibility for those who are inquiring,
yeah,
and action we need to have is, with confidence to know that divine providence has put the wind at our back for these things. George Washington, in his, I believe, it was his second inaugural address, mentioned that our entire life as believers in the Lord, as Christian people, and as citizens of this country, is to realize that the place where God has placed us is our sacred calling, and that we ought to take it as a calling that is fanned into flame by our action. And so he called our lives a sacred fire. He sincerely believed that the situations we find ourselves in, the causes we have to endeavor in, are to us a sacred calling from God, and they ought to be done in a just and righteous way. And if done in a just and righteous way, we should infallibly expect to see that there will be success from the Lord. That
right,
doesn't mean you win every battle. I mean, Valley Forge was a hard winter to have, and it doesn't mean that everything's going to be easy, but the Lord is going to be with you, and that the Lord will give us success. Nehemiah 2, Nehemiah, when he's going to build the walls and they have persecutors surrounding them, they send them the nasty grams and everything like that. He says, well, he calls everybody to prayer, and he says that the Lord will give us success. They pray and they do according to God's word, and that's the way that we ought to live and we ought to think. Instead of the fantasy world of the world, we need real Christian effort. Um, and that kind of segues into something else. Let's talk about the trans. Oh
oh,
man, we are going to get like ratioed into the. I think we should though,
yeah.
because we got to talk about it.
This video might never see the light of day.
If you're personally shared, you can listen. But yeah,
Yeah,
I think from go we might be ratioed
yeah.
by this one. Yeah.
Hey, we weren't we weren't monetized anyway, so
So there's a psychosis. I'm just going to go out and say it. There's a psychosis of the transvestitism that is going on right now, where people believe something about themselves other than what their physical biology tells them. That is mental disorder.
yeah,
Disorder in the sense that your mind is saying something other than what is reality. And it has been ex cathedra declared by the American Psychological Association to not be a psychosis, to not be a disorder any
right.
longer. And that is the fantasy world that we live in. Now, Russos John Rushdoony had some amazing words to say about this in his second volume of the Institutes of Biblical Law called The Law and Society. So it's volume 2, chapter 144, page 100, or sorry, 544. No, sorry, it's chapter 127, page 545. And he says this: the age of humanism has been marked by a pronounced will to fiction, a desire to live in a dream world, to a degree unequaled in all history. Modern man immerses himself in fantasy and fiction, in novels, films, television, and daily fantasies. He lives in a realm of fantasy. But this is not all. Politics is converted into efforts to try to enact dreams into reality by legislative fiat. In the realm of economics, the same is also true as in education and other areas. You could include the American Psychological Association, right?
Right.
Fantasy leading to a false reality that they're trying to create through legislation, through divine fiat, basically. But
Yeah.
it's really humanistic fiat. They're speaking and saying it exists. And he points to the example of the collapse of the Teton Dam in Idaho in 1976, which killed 14 people and damaged and destroyed property at the time valued over $4 million, which that's in 1982 money, so, or 1976 money. So
Yeah. Quite a
like
bit of money.
6,000 trillion, billion, quadrillion, who knows
Yeah.
now, based off of how inflation's gone since the 70s. Um, but he points out the dam was built on a faulty site in an earthquake region without strain gauges, with a too rapid fill, and with other instances of neglect and faulty construction. Moreover, since 1950, it's admitted that 37 other large dams have been built without various necessary strain gauges. Why? The federal agency responsible felt, quote, that nothing could happen inside those dams that would require instruments to detect. And he points out that this was a irrationality. It was a fantasy. They just didn't want to put the strain gauges on those who were building the dam. So they said, ex cathedra, no, it's not the case. And
Mhm.
so he points out Hegel expressed it clearly. The rational is the real. so he points out other examples. He goes to psychology. He says about psychological and basically scientific experiments papers that 80% of them were found in the 70s to already be published with unusable data because of the way that they were conducted as basically propaganda pieces paid for by groups that wanted fraud to be perpetrated.
Right.
And so he concludes, moreover, the most common consequence of a discovered fraud was nothing. In many cases, the person perpetrating the fraud was actually promoted. In a famous case, Sir Cyril Burt apparently fabricated theories of inherited intelligence differences which affected the educational and legal systems of England for the past 30 years and influenced the course of world psychology. These and other examples of like conduct in other areas clearly involve fraud, but basic to that fraud is fantasy. And this is where we get to a universal principle, which he always does. He says, when men forsake God, fantasy replaces reality. In Genesis 6:5, we are told, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And then he goes on, he concludes with this: imagination here includes rational thought, which is apostate and hence guilty of fantasy, because it begins with man rather than God, and also all frauds by man, whereby man acts on the belief that sin can succeed and that God can be mocked. It included also the dangerous realm of fantasizing and reshaping the world after our imagination, which is what all sin attempts to do. Well, what do we have here?
Yeah.
A diagnosis of the world we live in, a
Yeah.
fantasy world of nonsense.
Right. And as relates to basically trannyism, um, I don't know if I can say that word.
Is that a word?
Yeah. Um, and it's prescient in this moment
Late
because
stage sexual revolutionary theory, I guess.
because you know not only do we have apparently this Tyler Robinson, the shooter, having had a trans lover
Mhm.
and also been engaged with several you know trans people in the plotting the murder of Charlie Kirk online, but also in the violence that we've seen from the community directly.
Mhm.
You look at Nashville, you look at Minneapolis, and there's several other shootings that I can't remember off the top of
Or
my
you look
head.
at the actions of Antifa and all the other groups
Right.
also that
That
are
are
perpetrating these kinds of things
yeah.
based off of what they've been told by the academia and the news
Right.
and everything like that.
But and this is the sinister cocktail of like I guess like tranniest violence that we've seen is that basically you have people who and I greatly sympathize with them actually. Not empathy because I can't put myself in their shoes,
Right.
but I sympathize with them because I can't imagine what it's like to actually have that mental condition where as you're going through puberty, you can't stand the sound of your voice as it's changing. You can't, you know, look at yourself in the mirror. Like that kind of mental anguish is something that I can't comprehend with your own body. However, if any other body image, problem, someone that was suffering from that walked into a doctor's office, you had like say you had a teenage girl who, through like Instagram and like Facebook, you know, um, you know, as did happen, during the early to mid 2010s, um, you know, they get body image problems because like they see like anorexic women, um, and they think they need to look like that.
Right.
Um, so you have a perfectly healthy teenage girl, and like if she walked into a doctor's office and said, I need a gastric bypass because I feel hideous.
I've,
They would
I've
be
ballooned up to 95 pounds like a
yeah
pig, you know?
yeah you would they would be referred to psychological counseling. Same thing with like if I was a schizophrenic and I walked into a doctor's office and I went, hey, I need you to check for ants underneath my skin because I think there's ants underneath my skin. The government put them there. So, like I need you to like, put me out and then look for the ants underneath my skin. Well,
Mhm.
guess what that person's not getting? They're not getting put out and having doctors cut them up to look for the ants underneath their skin. They're going to psychological counseling. But in the case of gender dysphoria, you do that. Like that's when you do see the exact opposite methodology used to treat it. You're not, you're not treating a health. Basically, you're not treating a sick mind with a healthy, to view their healthy body as healthy and good, and learn and help them to like love the body that was wonderfully and fearfully made by God as a man or a woman. Instead, their delusions are engaged and not even solved because obviously you have like people say that people experience gender euphoria, but that goes away because 41% of them kill themselves. What ends up happening is that even the people who do survive, um you know the crash from that gender euphoria, the mental illness which caused them to want to seek this out in the first place has not been solved. So you have these inherently mentally unstable individuals who went down this path and they're getting whipped up by the media telling them, oh, well, there's a trans genocide. There's going to be a trans genocide. Like the government's going after trans people. Like they want to hurt you. Um, and then you mix that with, very, very insular web online communities. I mean, this is just like what's being uncovered about the investigation so far is that a very, prominent trans people on the internet with big followings or whatever, they're all connected and they were all involved in this. um so you look at that, you have this very tight knit cult like atmosphere, you have the inherent mental illness, and then you have the media frenzy of it, and that has been the cocktail of this violence. That when that brews together, you have these people, joining groups like Antifa and rioting and smashing things up. You have them wanting to kill Christians. You have them, plotting to murder Charlie Kirk. That is what you get out of that spiritual darkness. That's what you get out of this medical malpractice. That is what you get out of this environment in our society that basically has been created to facilitate this.
I think it's also worth saying too in that is that trans people who are really unloved by their family, who says, I just want my child to love me and I'm going to support him no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have to realize that the Lord offers you terms of peace. He offers you forgiveness of sins.
Right.
And that when you are alone in your room and you are crying yourself silly because you despair in your loneliness and your isolation and what you've wrought upon yourself through your own actions, the Lord offers you forgiveness. He offers you freedom and he offers you eternal life by faith, repentance, and turning to him and joining his covenant by way of baptism.
Yeah.
Now, you have to hear that because the Prince of Peace offers terms of peace, constantly holding out the blood of his cross to cover all a multitude of sins and give you significant healing in this life and also complete healing in the life to come
Right.
and life beyond the life to come in the resurrection of the body where you'll be glorified and have put on immortality.
Absolutely. And that's another thing to mention is, it's really heartbreaking to see these people with this anguish being mistreated. They are mistreated and they are engaged in their delusions, and they're simply brought further and further into this spiral, which often ends in the consumption of their life. And that's my heart breaks over it because it is politically motivated for people to do this.
Right.
It's become a social signal. Um, it's sick stuff, and they're going after children who are impressionable to this kind of thing, and that's who they want. That's who they're targeting. Um, and they're using them and they're burning them up. Just 41% of them kill themselves. They're cultivating this unstable group of people to do their dirty work for them.
Well, and also to have to realize that they're pawns in a game is
Yeah,
such an important factor here, and they will be thrown away with the trash just as close as everything else will.
right.
Like any kind of group like this, they Aristotle talked about this with tyrants that the tyrants need factions, they need foreigners,
Right.
they need these different groups that look at each the natural citizens or those who are law abiding as basically inhuman.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to create that, you have to either import the Persians to Athens,
Right.
or you have to, import other ideologies and bifurcate people away from each other, separate and make
Yeah.
them antagonistic toward each other, and then you can rule over them because they see each other inhumanly. And so we do need to recognize that these are sinners who need the gospel,
Right.
and but for the grace of God, there go we
And
potentially.
and that would and that was kind of my point is that basically my my call base would be seek forgiveness, seek restoration, seek the peace that you are seeking through you know this mutilation of your organs and your body that ultimately, and I think it deep down, that like it hasn't delivered to anyone, to any of you. But Christ can give you that peace. He can heal what's been broken. um don't throw your life away. Don't ruin yourself for the cause of people who just want to use you and want to see you despair and who want to whip your despair into action on their behalf. That's and ultimately to consume your life. um and like people make a lot of like bones about like, okay, like this gets overused, like, oh, X thing is demonic.
Mhm.
Well, the only cui bono of transgenderism that I can see is Satan.
Right. I was going to mention that too, because I think we're thinking of the same wavelength here. Is pawns in a game politically, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're used as a mechanism of stochastic terrorism, but along with that is the devil seeks to kill, steal, and destroy.
Right.
His methodology is exactly the same. Those methodologies come from the Book of Revelation. They're from the pit. The all the things about like the methodologies of like the Soviet Union, of the handbook for radicals, rules for radicals, all those things, they come literally from satanic thinking. And this is not like a conspiracy theory kind of way of explaining this. Using methods throughout the ages that have always been consistent, that are mentioned in Revelation chapter 13, in order to curtail the church and in order to persecute it by not taking the symbolic mark of the beast, not an actual mark on your credit card or on your forearm, but the symbolic mark of acquiescence to obedience to falsehood. That is the key. They want you to, here we go, wear the mask, take the jab, do the things you have to do, salute the trans flag, hand over your children to the public schools, and you have to go along with the lie. That is the symbolic meaning of the mark of the beast. It appears from age to age to be the same. You're not allowed to buy or sell. You're not allowed to vote. You're not allowed to participate.
Mm.
You'll eventually be persecuted and broken down by the woman who rides on the back of the beast. And the beast from the sea
Yeah.
is representative of the civil government, and the beast from the land, the false prophet, is symbolic of the false church.
And have we not already kind of seen that? You know, because obviously, like, it's not like a physical mark on your right hand on your forehead. No, I mean, it goes back to the way Moses explained the law, as you know, it basically, you would just live it out. It would be so plainly obvious in front of you that it'd be like on your right, to your hand and to your forehead.
Right. It
Um,
was symbolic originally when it came up in Deuteronomy 6, right?
yeah.
So,
Um, yeah, and obviously, like you see, like when the people go to the Wailing Wall, they have the phylacteries wrapped around, and like
yeah.
the
Which Jesus literally said, don't do that.
yeah,
That's not the meaning of that. And in the Gospels, right? But people still, they don't read it as a symbol,
yeah,
they think it's like in the future, the Antichrist is going to have us put a barcode on our forehead and our right
yeah,
hand. Maybe it's Bitcoin, maybe it's credit cards, maybe it's social security number. And they've gone over and over and over again. And
but
they've never done anything with it to curtail these things, but because they haven't recognized, no, it's mechanisms of totalitarian control that are being referred to there in Revelation chapter 13.
yeah,
In Rome, in Jerusalem, in the present day.
right,
Theological liberalism is a great example of the woman who rides on the back of the beast, the false prophet, the harlot. And then you also have, then on the other side, you have the governments of
yeah,
this world who are going along with that and like, hey, we're bolstered by this group,
yeah.
that kind of thing.
But where I do recognize the mark, and there have been many marks throughout history. I mean, we're partial preterists here, so don't think we're like getting rapture fever about this, but um, you know, you can see the mark in your neighbor who flies you know, the rainbow flag with like the I mean, they have like a ton of different, like it has like a ton of different different editions now. Um, and they have like an SUV that's stickered to hell, um, with just insane political slogans and other things.
You're talking about a Subaru.
I mean, it could be a Subaru. Could
I digress.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, no. I mean, it could be a Subaru, but I mean, I have a person in mind, and I think they have a Jeep. But yeah, and you can't talk to them. Every single thought in their moment is consumed with, you know, how evil Trump is. Um, their entire like political worldview. It's all they talk about.
Mhm.
Like they, they just can't stop talking about it. They're at every protest. They're, you know, I mean, like they don't have a normal social media anymore. They don't post pictures of Thanksgiving. They don't post pictures of like, oh, I had a nice day at the beach today, like normal people. No, their entire page is just, you know, Trump did this. This comedian said this thing about Trump that I found it really funny. Oh, look at this person roasting conservative. That's literally their
Yeah.
entire page.
Yeah,
Um,
those aren't even funny.
yeah,
It's just sad
right,
pandering.
right. But that's the thing. Is like they've taken the mark
Right.
because now this idol of like call it liberalism, leftism, whatever you want to call it, this evil ideology, it is now into their hand, into their forehead.
Yeah, virtue signaling is a great parallel.
Yeah,
Yeah. So it sounds like we have exhausted the subject matter, and I think that we have solved all of the world's problems.
yeah,
But listen, share with your friends. Hopefully, this is helpful for you. We'll probably produce more of these, I'm guessing.
yeah,
Pray for us. Pray for John. He's got a lot riding on his shoulders, a lot of responsibilities for such a time as this. This significant thing, and take up your responsibility. Look at these principles. Look up the Magdeburg Confession. Understand where you stand and what God has called you to do, and get into church. If you don't go to church, you are listening to this channel wrong. The covenant is a local community. Get into a local covenant community. Worship the Lord on the Lord's Day. Use the Lord's Day for all it's worth. Teach your family. Bring everybody along with you, and get into the actual transformative thing of this world, which is the worship of God. Hear God's word and learn and be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
yeah. Well, and with that, I just want to say, rest in peace, Charlie. Put in a good word with for us with Dad, and we got it from here.
Cry out, how long, O Lord? How long until you bring vengeance? Vengeance is the Lord's, remember.